Okay, I put Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 8 up here for a reason, particularly going through this study of the 12 tribes. We're calling it the first family because it really is the first family of history. I know we could count Adam and Eve and who we come from, but really all the center of history deals with the Hebrew nation and the Jews, and it's going to have an effect for all eternity. And of course, it's from this family that Jesus Christ comes from, the 12 tribes of Israel. And we've looked at Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah in particular. Tonight we're going to look at Dan, but this is important particularly in this night. It applies to every lesson, every sermon, everything. But Nehemiah 8:8 I discovered years ago. I made it sort of my mantra of when I stand to teach. Nehemiah chapter 8 verse 8 says this, "So they read in the book of the law distinctly and gave the sense and caused them to understand the reading." So there you have three things: reading the book, and that's distinctly, and then giving the sense to what you read. And if you give the sense to what you read, then the people who hear it then walk away understanding it, whereas before they didn't understand it. That's why God gives you pastors and teachers. That's why God specifically put me here. That's my goal, is that when we read these scriptures, I can help you get some sense out of it, and then you walk away and go, well, I didn't see that before. And then that's, if we're able to accomplish that, then we've done what we could. So the tribe of Dan is one of those that gets in deep water pretty quickly and takes us pretty fast. Reuben and Simeon particularly, they were okay. They were these guys and they messed up. Levi was a little more in depth because he became the priesthood, and of course Judah, we could have given a lot more time to Judah. We went through it pretty quickly, but Judah, of course, gives us the line of Christ, and that's what we focused in that lesson. But this one, Dan, goes deep pretty quick. So let's start with his birth. It's a little unusual. It's Genesis chapter 30, verse 6. And what has happened in this family, I've told you in the past that if you like these daytime dramas or these nighttime soap operas like Yellowstone, there's nothing like the Bible. You can't match the Bible. If you want drama, if you want intrigue, if you want murder, I mean, if that's your thing and that's what you like, you want mystery, you want to be in the detective mode, the Bible is the place to go. It's the first place for any kind of entertainment. But the real thing about this is not made up. This is not written by Hollywood. This is real stuff. So we remember that Jacob marries Leah. He thinks he's marrying Rachel. But Laban, his father-in-law, the dad of these two girls, sneaks in Leah on wedding night, and Jacob doesn't know that he's sleeping with Rachel. Sleeping with Leah. He thinks he's sleeping with Rachel. You say, how did he not know? Well, they're sisters, first of all. And I'm sure this sister could imitate this sister. So he thinks it's her. Maybe she didn't talk. Maybe she wore the same perfume. Who knows? But he just doesn't realize it. You say, well, he should have. Well, he didn't. And so he wakes up, and the Bible says this. I love how it says it. And behold, it was Leah. Just got to laugh at some things, right? You're not who I thought you were. And so he goes to Laban and says, what have you done to me? And Laban sort of sobers him up, and he says, well, it's in our country. It's the normal in our country to give the firstborn. Well, remember, he had stolen the firstborn's birthright, right? And the blessing. So now he marries Rachel, and Leah and Rachel, but Rachel is loved, Leah isn't. And so God gives Leah fruitfulness, 4 sons, back to back to back. And Rachel, because she's barren, comes up with this idea of giving her handmaid, her servant, Bilhah, to Jacob and says, go into her. Let her be the surrogate mom. So Jacob goes along, and Bilhah has two sons, Dan, and next time we'll talk about Naphtali. Tonight is Dan. And here's where he's born in Genesis chapter 30, verse 6, with everything I've just told you. And Rachel said, God hath judged me, and hath also heard my voice, and hath given me a son. Therefore called she his name Dan. Now, it's not biologically her son. Biologically, it's Jacob and Bilhah. But she adopts the son, claims the son, makes him her son, and names him Dan. Dan means judge. Now let's go to Genesis chapter 49, and that's where we get our parameters really for how their life is going to go. While you're turning there, if you'll turn to Deuteronomy chapter 33, we'll get this too, and you'll see just what happens with Dan. Now he is really the first half-brother to these guys. And so Dan is born, and in Genesis 49:16, when Jacob is on his deathbed and he's giving this last will and testament, and it's actually a prophecy because it says in verse 1, these are the things that will follow you in the last days. And he's gone through Reuben. Verse 3, he's given Simeon and Levi their due in verse 5 and 6. He gives Judah his due in verse 8. And we didn't go into this in verse 8, but just to look at it, in verse 10, there's the king. This is Judah. The scepter shall not depart from Judah. There's going to be kings come from him, right? That's what we saw. King after king after king after king. And a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh, capital S, that's Jesus Christ, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. And then it talks about Jesus in verse 11. That's Jesus Christ in verse 11. Because look what happens. Binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt unto the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. So did he ride the foal of an ass? Right there it is in verse 11. And is he coming back and he's going to stamp out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored? That's Isaiah chapter 63. What's these blood on thy vesture? And he says, this is me bringing judgment upon Israel. And I've told you before, teaching you that the blood will be up, according to the book of Revelation, up to the horse's bridle, how deep the blood will be in Armageddon. So that's prophesied in verse 11. And then verse 12, there's his eye shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. Now that is Judah. References to Jesus Christ. Now it goes out of order here. Zebulun and Issachar get next. We're going to come to them. I'm just doing it in birth order. And in verse 16 we come to Dan. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. There's a reason why that's said, and I'll show you in a little while that is, and so that I remember to do that. Let me put up Revelation chapter 7 here so I don't miss it. As one of the tribes of Israel. So then let's go to Deuteronomy 33. So it says that Dan will be a judge in his people. That's what his name means, judge. Judge. And we know who came from Dan. And his name, the most famous person to ever come from Dan, was a guy named Samson. Samson is the tribe of Dan. What was he? He was a judge. And that's going to begin in Judges chapter 16. And the story of his exploits, 14 through 16, I think it is. The Philistines have given Israel problems, and Samson comes along and comes a judge. He dies in a sad way. His eyes plucked out, hair cut off, like an ox he's out there grinding the mill. And then the hair begins to grow back, and he asks God to avenge his eyes. Now, Deuteronomy 33, and we have to go all the way down to verse 22 to find Dan. And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's whelp, and he shall leap from Bashan. Now that's all that says. So the children of Israel go into the promised land, and we see how the things are distributed here. Judah is in the south, and they are, of course, the kingly tribe. They are the leaders of the tribe. They are the tribe that remains true to God. When all the other tribes are carried off into captivity to Assyria, Judah is still left here. They eventually rebel and go against God, but they have some good kings. Asa, Hezekiah, Josiah starts reigning when he's 8 years old. And there's times of revival in Judah, and they remain strong to Israel 100 years or more after all of Israel is carried off to Assyria. Then Judah is carried off into Babylon. We know that story. But up here is Dan. Now Dan is just here, but Dan is not satisfied with his territory. He's not happy. He doesn't like being on the sea. And so, if you'll turn to a couple of passages here, we'll show you that. Turn to Joshua, where the distribution of the land takes place. And if you'll just bear with me and go through this a little bit of history with me, then I'll show you the climax of that in just a moment. Let's go to Joshua chapter 19. This is some of that reading when we get to 18, 19, 17 of Joshua. It's just really drudgery to get through. But then you see some things that pop out that you don't want to miss. And the Lord buries these things sometimes in dry places. It's like a well to give you some knowledge. For example, look at 43. And Elon and Timotha and Ekron and Elkahah and Gibbethon and Baalath and Jehud and Benarak and Gathramon and Majakaron and Raycon with the border before Japheth. And what are you going? You're going, we got any Pepsi in the refrigerator? I got anything better to do than read this? And if you're not careful, you'll just go, okay, I got to move on. I need to go to Ephesians. But keep reading. Verse 47. And the coast of the children of Dan went out too little for them. They're not happy with this. They're not happy. We want more. Therefore, the children of Dan went up to fight against Leshem, and took it, and smote it with the edge of the sword, and possessed it, and dwelt there, and called Leshem Dan, after the name of Dan their father. So they're not happy, so they go way up north and get them some territory up here. They're not satisfied with what God gave them. See? You with me so far? Rebellion. Dan and rebellion. Now look at Judges chapter 1, verse 34. Next book. Judges 1:34. And the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountain, for they would not suffer them to come down into the valley. Then it goes on to tell you a little bit about that. So when they go get this land, there are mountains and valleys there, and the valleys are the fertile land. That's the land that will be most equitable and make the children of Dan prosperous. But they get up there among the Amorites, and the Amorites said, oh, no, you're not going to have this fertile land. If you ain't happy with what you got down here, then you're up here among the enemy, and the enemy says you can't have the best land up here. So they forced them into the mountains so they couldn't stay where they were. Now that begins all kinds of problems for Dan, which you would expect to be problems, because Dan is not satisfied with his territory. He wants more. Proverbs 1 talks about being greedy of gain. Talking about the wicked, greedy of gain. So we don't want to be that way. We don't want to not. Paul the Apostle said, here's one of the amazing things I admire him for and pray I was more like him. He said, I have found whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. You know who wrote that? That's a guy in jail. That's a guy getting beaten 5 times, and that's a guy who's spent a night and a day in the water, naked. That's a guy shipwrecked thrice, it says, and he just goes, if I'm bond or if I'm free, if I'm excelling or I'm decelling, if God gives, if God takes away, I'm just good with it. Wouldn't you like to be more like that? Because most of us, I'll say me, I won't say you, I'm not as content that I ought to be. I'm always, tempted to get on Amazon just to look to see what else do I need? I just probably need something today, and so I'll go get it. I bought a telescope today. Just saw a telescope. Oh, I'd like to have a telescope. So there's a black spot here behind the church. And if you ever come by and all the lights are turned out and I've hit the breaker and there's no lights on, it's so I can look at that sky. So did I need a telescope? No, I wanted a telescope. I couldn't say, well, I'm content with just using my eyes. I'd like to get a little deeper up there and look. No, I think I'll glorify God through it, and I can always justify it, can't you? You can always, well, I want that. Well, it'd be good for me to have that. That's Dan. That's Dan. Not content with what you've got, so you want a little more, and then when you begin having that attitude, you find out most of the time what you get just ends up in a storage unit or, honey, we got to get another storage unit. Why? Because we got more junk than what we know. Well, why don't you just give it away? Because I might use that someday. Might need it. Okay, that's us. That's Dan. Are you feeling any conviction yet? That's Dan. But Dan goes worse. Dan gets himself in real trouble, and it's a preview that's given us in Samson, because Samson, while he was a great hero and a great judge, and we tell our children those stories, our grandchildren love to preach from Samson, because it takes the jawbone of an ass and kills 1,000 Philistines, and he picks up that iron gate and carries it to the top of the hill, and he takes 300 foxes. This may be his greatest feat. He catches 300 foxes, ties their tails together, and sets them on fire. I have never figured out how he did that. First of all, how do you catch 300 foxes? Second of all, how do you tie their tails together without the other 298 running away? And then you set the fire on one and the other foxes are going, so this is the way it's going to be. But somehow he corralled them, he kept them together. Mighty man. But there lurks Delilah. And his problem was women his whole life. Read his life. It's just women here and women here and women here. And not good women. I'm not saying women are bad for life. I'm just saying they're not the kind of women you'd want to be. Delilah's not the kind of woman you would want your son to marry. Right? So, he's a preview of what's going to happen. Now here comes one of the most, I don't want to hype it too much. This chapter in the Bible, Judges 18, is one of the watershed chapters in all the Bible. And most Christians have no idea what it means or what it says. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to look at it. And what you're going to see here in this chapter is going to be quite remarkable. Now, we've got to go to chapter 17 to get it first. Judges 18 deals with Dan. But Judges chapter 17, this is after Samson. Samson's just died in the previous chapter, in chapter 16. So in chapter 17, I don't want to read it all, but I've got to read it out. There was a man of Mount Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said unto his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from thee, about which thou cursest, and spakest in mine ears, behold, silver is with me. I took it. So what did he do? He stole from his mama. And his mother said, Blessed be thou of the Lord, my son. And when he restored the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother said, I had wholly dedicated the silver unto the Lord from mine hand for my son, to make a graven image and a molten image. Now therefore I'll restore it unto thee. Okay, now this is a weird story. It just pops up in the Bible. Man steals from his mama, says to his mama, Mom, I'm convicted about this. My conscience is bothering me. I stole that money from you. And she said, well, bless the Lord. I was going to give it to you to make an idol. Now, why is God telling us all this? Well, Micah's key to something that happens in history that you are still now, today, experiencing. What? You are still dealing with this today. What is it? Oh, I'm going to show you. Forgot your interest? And when he had restored the 1,100 shekels of silver, so she says that, verse 4, yet he restored the money to his mother, and his mother took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to the founder, and made thereof a graven image and a molten image, and they were in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had an house of gods, and made an ephod and teraphim, and consecrated one of his sons, who became his priest. And in those days there was no king in Israel, and every man did that was right in his own eyes. So he has a personal priest. His priest. See that? His priest. Now, is that the way it's supposed to be set up? Is that the way God set things up with Levi? That a guy, each family, each person is going to have their own priest? No, that's not the way it's set up. And of course, we got the idols involved, and we know that's an issue. So keep reading. And there was a young man out of Bethlehem, Judah, the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. And the man departed out of the city of Bethlehem, Judah, to sojourn where he could find a place. And he came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, as he journeyed. And Micah said unto him, Whence comest thou? And he said unto him, I am a Levite of Bethlehem, Judah, and I go to sojourn where I may find a place. He's looking for a job, right? Looking for a job. He's been all over he's on LinkedIn, you know, he's put his resume out. He's been reading the want ads. I'm just trying to find the place where I'm supposed to be. So Micah, who has these gods in his house, these idols in his house, who wants a priest for him, says this, and Micah said unto him, Dwell with me, and be unto me tell me what that next word is. A father. A father. A father. And a priest. And I will give thee 10 shekels of silver by year, and a suit of apparel, and thy victuals. So the Levite went in. Man, that's a great deal. You're going to give me a new suit every year, and you're going to pay me this money, and all I got to do is be your personal priest? Mike says, yep. So here for the first time in history, in Judges chapter 17, the first time in history, you have an older man calling a younger man father. Now that's weird. Because right ever since Adam and he had sons, his sons always called the older man father. And the older man called the younger men sons. Right? That's easy. That's logical. That makes sense. Now you come to Judges 17, and again I'll say it so you get it. Here you have an older man calling a younger man father because he's a priest. Now I think it's beginning to click what's going on here, right? A priest who is called Father. You ever heard of that? Does that go on today? Yeah. Jesus Christ says later in the New Testament, he says, call no man on earth your father, for you have one Father, that is God in heaven. Now, people have misread that. People have gone way overboard with that and say, well, does that mean I'm not supposed to call my daddy father, father and mother, you know? That's in literature. And some people, I call my dad daddy, and my sons call me that. They still call me dad. Some of them call me pops, but nobody calls me father. Well, how are you, father? But in some instances, that's a formality and it's a token of love. And God's not saying, Jesus Christ is not saying, don't use that term to describe your parent. This is a spiritual thing. This is referring to Judges 17. And he says, you don't call any man in a religious setting father. Don't ever do it. So if you come across, I'm not saying for you to be rude, but I'm saying when you come across somebody who has that term, don't call them that. Hey pal, how are you? How you doing, dude? Good to see you. Or mister. You know, you don't have to be disrespectful. But don't call him father. Why? The Bible tells you not to. It's just like, I sort of get bent sideways. You folks don't know this, but you don't call me this. Sometimes that happens at the funeral home, and I just bite my tongue and hold it. But sometimes they want to put the term reverend on me. And I ain't no reverend. Don't ever call me that. Because if I ain't in a good mood, I'll tell you. You say, why are you so strict about that? Psalm, I think it's 146, says, holy and reverend is thy name. Only time the term reverend shows up in your Bible, it's reference to God. So when they start calling me that, it's like, Father. It's his term, not mine. Okay? Now I know it's become tradition and all that kind of thing. And so if I go there, it's one of the reasons I'm glad I got my PhD. At least now they have to put doctor instead of reverend. Thank God. Get rid of that. So yeah, you're a fanatic. Okay. Just give me a pass on that. So now Judges chapter 18. I'm going to summarize it for you, all right? So in Judges chapter 18, here's the tribe of Dan. And I hope you go home and read Judges chapter 18. But here's what happened. So I've set the story for you. Micah has his personal priest. He's calling him father. They're doing all this worship of the false god. And he's got a Levite. He fits. He's a Levite. So he's not making people of the lowest sort like Jeroboam later does and makes them priests. So in chapter 18, the tribe of Dan comes riding up one day to Micah's house. And they're warriors. I mean, these are fighters. This is just after Samson of the tribe of Dan. So Dan's got a reputation of being warriors. What did the scripture say? He is like a lion, a young lion. Not like the lion of the tribe of Judah, but a lion. But he's also like Genesis chapter 49, he's a serpent. So in Judges chapter 18, they come running up to Micah's house. They've been on some adventure and they come up to Micah's house. They say, hey, you got any food? Yeah, we need some victuals. Can you give us something to eat? So Micah gives us some victuals. And the Levite comes out. This young man comes out and says, hey, who are you? He said, I'm this guy's priest. What? Yeah, I'm a priest for Micah. And Dan goes, don't think I've ever heard about that before. And they get together and they talk and they say, hey, how would you like to come to work for us? And the young man goes, well, what do you mean? And he says, well, would you rather be a priest and a father to one man in one little house? Or would you rather be a priest to a whole tribe? Well, you know what the young man does. What most preachers do, it's a bigger church. So the preacher one day goes home and tells his wife, says, honey, this church is wanting to call me as their pastor, and we'll have to leave our little church and go to this other church. And she said, well, how big a church is it? And she says, well, it's 500 people. And she said, well, I'll pack, you pray. Get it? Bigger church, bigger salary, bigger influence. It must be the will of God. So this young man goes, well, of course I would like to do that. I think it's probably God's will that I go and be a priest for the whole tribe. Now, what do you think God thinks about that? Remember how God set things up? 48 cities, 6 cities of refuge, the tabernacle set up, bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, that's all the book of Levi. And that's how we're going to do things. And once a year, you're going to go in and you're going to make an offering on the high day, the holy day, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. You're going to go in and make a sacrifice for sins. But here's Dan and says, oh, no. We got a much better idea. We're going to have one priest who's dedicated only to us. So why is this chapter so important? Is because, brethren, despite what the history books say, there's the beginning of the Catholic Church. At least the idea behind it. At least it's birthed the conception of having a priest, a younger man. I'm not saying all priests are younger men. They started out as younger men. And how many places in this country where in a Catholic church you have people, older people, calling a younger man Father? Where did it start? Right there. If Genesis 1 is the creation of the world, and it is, Judges 17 and 18 is the start of the concept of the Catholic Church. That's why that chapter is important. Now, turn to 1 Kings. We'll finish this up. 1 Kings chapter 12. Because we know how this thing's going to go for Dan, you know that this can't happen and God be happy about it. So you can expect that God's going to bring some judgment against them. And 1 Kings chapter 12, there's a lot here that we could look at. So we're just going to skip down to verse 28. Whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold and said unto them, and this is Jeroboam, by the way. Remember, Jeroboam is not the son of Solomon. Rehoboam is. Sometimes people think, well, Rehoboam and Jeroboam, and they jump to the conclusion, well, those must be brothers. There's no kinship. Rehoboam is just this servant that rises up, and God says, you're going to be king. And he's a wicked man. You'll read through Kings, and he'll say, this guy was really bad, but he wasn't as bad as Jeroboam. So here's Jeroboam, and look what he does. Verse 28, whereupon the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold and said unto them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one of them in Bethel and the other up in Dan. Dan. So Dan becomes the center with Bethel, house of God, way back in the book of Genesis. That's where Jacob is, and he says, I met God, and I'm going to call this place Bethel, the house of God. And what's Jeroboam do? Come along. He comes along and takes that special place in history and sets up a golden calf there. And the other one he sets up in Dan. And he says, hey guys, it's just too inconvenient. It's too far for you to go all the way from here down to Jerusalem. They've split, right? They've had this split between Jeroboam and Rehoboam. And all the time before, during the King David's time and King Solomon's time, going all the way back to Joshua's time, whenever they took that land, they would always go down here and make their worship, and always go down here and make their sacrifices, and always go down here. Was it a trip? Yeah, it was a trip, but it wasn't so bad. I mean, this is not far. I mean, people travel all the time, but Jeroboam says, no. That's old-fashioned. We're not going to do that. Besides, we're split between them. Nobody wants to go to Jerusalem anymore. It's probably not safe for you to go. So we'll just set up our own gods here. And God sees them set up these 2 golden calves. And for lack of a better term, to make it in the vernacular, we understand that really got under God's skin. To have those idols set up. What was one of the commandments God said? Thou shalt make no graven image. Oh, by the way, this is going to be hard for you to believe. So I challenge you to go look it up. If you look up the 10 Commandments by the Catholics, that one ain't in there. You say the Catholics got 10 Commandments? Yeah, they got 10 Commandments. But not making graven images. Why? They got images everywhere. How do you go everywhere? There's Mary, and there's Thomas, and there's Pope John Paul II. You know, they just got them everywhere. Images. I used to go to a hospital called St. Mary's. It was in Knoxville. And you go to St. Mary's, and there's Mary in the praying garden, and you go in, and there's statues everywhere. And they'll go in and kneel. Thou shalt not make no graven image. One of their images has Mary with a halo on her head holding that baby. It's called the Madonna. The Madonna. It's one of the most wicked pieces of art you've ever seen. Wicked. Why? It makes her the goddess. That's Diana of the Ephesians. That's Ashtaroth. That's not Mary. Not the Mary of the Bible. They call her that. But that ain't her. Because they've given her perpetual virginity, that she sinned against her husband and didn't have sex with her husband and certainly had no more children. I mean, what's the Bible talking about Mary having other children? She was a virgin, and she was the Ascension, the Immaculate Conception. You know, she had this baby, Jesus, and then, of course, now, if you want to get in good with me, what you do is you call my mama and you say, hey, Mama, you do anything with this guy? So the Catholics have adopted that mentality and said, hey, if you really want to get to Jesus, you need to go through Mary. There's one mediator between God and men, the man, Christ Jesus. There's nowhere in that Bible that says you have to get anything from Mary. I'm preaching. Okay. So they set up this thing. And that brings us to the conclusion. Revelation chapter 7. You say, preacher, why have I never been taught this before? Well, I don't know. I told you last week some of the things you're getting here, especially on Wednesday nights, they don't teach in seminary. I didn't learn that in seminary. They never teach that in seminary. We live in this day where everybody's got to walk on eggshells. You know, I may put this up and it be banned. Why? Because I've been anti-something. You can't be anti-something anymore. If you are, then especially, you can be anti-Christian. You can be anti-Bible. But you can't be anti-other things, or they'll kick you out. So that may be one reason. Everybody's afraid to talk about it. Well, you know, if they ban me, they ain't banned much. Ain't lost much. I ain't lost anything. Revelation chapter 7. Now here we come to the 12 tribes of Israel. These are the 144,000 that are going to be marked in their forehead at the tribulation. The reason this mark is important is because if these 144,000 Jews, they're all male, by the way. There's no females. No females. All males. They're all virgins. You say where you get that from? Revelation chapter 14. That's Revelation chapter 14. But what we're getting here in Revelation chapter 7 is these are the 144,000 witnesses. These are Jehovah's Witnesses. The real ones. And they're going to go through all the earth and they're going to preach the everlasting gospel. And as they preach that, then they have marked in their foreheads so the beast cannot harm them. They have a special protection about them, just like Moses and Elijah in Revelation chapter 11. And then in Revelation chapter 14, they're going to be raptured out of here. Just like you're going to be raptured out of here. We talk about the rapture. There's lots of raptures in the church. Jesus Christ technically was raptured. So, that's a lot of stuff in 5 minutes, isn't it? Revelation chapter 7, look here. And he named, I heard the number of them that were sealed. I'm in verse 4. And they were sealed in 144,000, all the tribes of the children of Israel. All the tribes of the children of Israel. All the tribes of the children of Israel. Well, we know who the 12 tribes are. That's what we're studying. Let's read it. Of the tribe of Judah were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Reuben were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Gad were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Aser were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Naphtali, that's Naphtali, were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Manasseh were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Simeon were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Levi were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Issachar were 12,000. Of the tribe of Zebulun were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Joseph were sealed 12,000. Of the tribe of Benjamin were sealed 12,000. After this, that's the 12. 2 are missing. Did you catch it? 2 are missing. Read that again and see if you see Dan. He ain't in there. And you know who else isn't in there? Ephraim. Ephraim ain't in there. There's a reason for that. But you'll have to come back to find out why. But you see tonight why Dan isn't there. God marked them off because of this. They weren't happy with their land. Joshua chapter 19 verse 47. They were not satisfied. They couldn't defeat their enemies, even though God says, I will be thee, I will be with thee, I'll drive them out. They couldn't drive them out. They became thorns in their sides. They get up north and they make this priest their priest, and one of the golden calves will sit up in Dan. And the Lord goes, I'm going to judge you for that. Now here's the thing about God's patience that so overwhelms us. Time is still passing. And he still hasn't judged them. Now he judged them in the fact that they were all carried away. For them, they were carried off by Assyria. But God's still waiting to bring the final judgment. And that final judgment is anybody from the tribe of Dan won't get a mark in their forehead. And what does that mean? They will be meat for the killing. They will be persecuted Jews if they're from the tribe of Dan. You say, well, that's awful. That's awful hard of God to do. Behold the goodness and severity of God. God's not going to be mocked. He's not going to be mocked. Whatsoever man soweth, that she also reap. And here you see the sowing. And over here in Revelation chapter 7, you see the reaping. Get that? Now, there's one more thing. I'll close with this because I can't say enough about it. Don't say much about it because I don't know that much about it, and I don't know if it's even true. But I will throw it out here for you to think about, just like I am. The Antichrist is going to come from one of these 12 tribes. He's going to be Jewish. We know that. He has to be in order for him to be able to stand up and say, I'm the real Christ. He couldn't be a Gentile. He couldn't be an Arabian. Couldn't be. The Jews are not going to accept anyone except someone who's Jewish. Now, I mean, he may be a half-breed. He may be half Jewish and half Syrian because he's called the Assyrian in the Bible. But he's got to come from one of those 12 tribes. Which of the 12 tribes? That's always been a mystery. Which of the 12 tribes will he come from? Now, I'm going to give you two possibilities for that. Either He'll come from the tribe of Dan. Many believe that's the case because he's called a serpent. Now that makes sense, right? If he's a serpent, that connects him with the devil. So maybe the Antichrist will come from the tribe of Dan. The other possibility that I throw out here, I don't think I've ever heard anybody teach this. I don't think I have. If I don't mean to steal it from somebody else, if I am, and if I am, I apologize. Because I'm not saying I'm the only one who's ever thought of this. I've just never heard it. There's a possibility, too, that he comes from Judah. Because Jesus Christ had 4 brothers. And maybe, just maybe, he's going to come from one of those 4 brothers and be able to tie himself back to Joseph and say, Joseph was my daddy. Jesus Christ didn't come from Joseph. He's a thief and a robber. I'm the real descendant. I came from Judah, and I can show you that Solomon and David are my daddy, and I'm the real Christ. And the Jews will go, oh, our King, our Christ, the real Christ. Remember, they've rejected Jesus Christ. Thief and a robber, blasphemer. Jesus said, another will come in his own name, you'll receive him. I come in my Father's name, you reject me. So that's the 2 possibilities. Will he come from Dad? Maybe. Will he come from Judah? Maybe. Will he come from another tribe? Who knows? But that's just a couple of ideas to just take in there and say, there's much more, I keep telling you this, there's much more in that Bible than we have ever imagined.